Alrighty, let's get started. Today we're talking about gamification, nailing your product goals by influencing user habits. We've got Shady here. Shady's a senior product manager from Terram. Shady, do you want to flick the slide across?
Yep.
So a little bit about me.
So-
I'm the CEO and founder of Terram. We're a product development firm. AFR Fast 100 for 2 years in a row. Really, all that's come from delivering products for our clients. I've personally been involved in over 61 major product launches. I'm an amateur sausage maker. I'm looking forward to going sailing now that spring's set in this weekend. I think, look, product is just a huge passion of mine. That's why I love this webinar series that we're doing, where we have a chat to folks from all different companies, walks of life, and everything about building great products. So today, we've got Shady here with us. Shady is, do you want to flick slides, Shady? Shady, 10 years experience as a product manager, co-founder of a tech company that he exited. Parents not massive M&M fans. I take you're an M&M fan, Shady. But my probably favorite personal note that Shady wanted to share with you all is that he's the self-proclaimed king of pasta making. I think this is a pretty controversial claim to make, Shady, but
Look, I will take on all challenges. So any challenges out there, let me know.
got it here. Can be challenged to pasta making. I'll happily be the judge if that helps. I'll put my hand up to be the judge.
Awesome.
But I think really relevant is Shady recently did a lot of work with Woolworths loyalty program, helping out with their working on a product that used gamification for their user base, and has also done a lot of other work in and around gamification and gaming as well. So a topic really close to your heart, I think. I'm super keen.
Definitely.
I'm going to hand over to you. And I think just before I do, anyone in the audience, please feel free, pop questions in the chat. This is really meant to be a discussion. Grab a cup of tea. Let's get into it and learn about gamification today. Over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Thank you so much for that awesome intro. And yeah, just on your point, please, everyone, make sure you throw in questions and stuff. I don't like to sit here and lecture. I much prefer to have a robust discussion about things. But let's get into it. So gamification. So I really want to spend a bit of time on the actual definition of gamification. For me personally, I've seen it misconstrued a whole bunch of times in many different boardrooms and many different settings. There seems to be a perception of what it is, and that perception seems to be different depending on who you speak to. I guess the main point I want to hammer home, first and foremost, gamification is not gaming. You can't just add a game or a particular game element to your product and all of a sudden have this awesome, amazing product and we've got gamification and away we go. So just quickly going through the actual textbook definition of gamification is the application of typical elements of game playing, example, point scoring, competition with others, rules of play, to other areas of activity, typically as an online marketing technique to encourage engagement with a product or service. So you can see even the textbook definition mentions that it's like a marketing technique, but it is so much more than that. And I would hope that by the end of this webinar, everyone will actually kind of can see the power of gamification, and when utilized correctly and when thought about in the correct manner, how powerful it actually is. Like it's a great tool for influencing user behavior. So what I believe is missing from the definition is that to drive a desired outcome by influencing user behavior. And it really starts with that desired outcome. That's where you have to start when you think about gamification. So what I always tell people, it's an overarching strategy. It's not one thing, and it needs to really be embedded in your product design and your product strategy.
And I think that kind of like your interpretation of the definition really resonates with me as to why it's like so relevant. It's not about gaming. It's we're all trying to influence desired outcomes by influencing
Correct.
User behavior. Like anyone building a product, doing anything's trying to do this. So that I think it's a super relevant topic to anyone really building product.
Yeah, look, 100%. Even if we take gamification out of it, I think what's really going to be useful for those attending this webinar is there's certain concepts that can kind of be applied to anything when it comes to product management. And as we kind of go through, you'll see. So we're talking a lot about user behavior. So let's get into the actual science. So what's the science of user behavior? So the BJ Fogg behavioral model, which is from the Stanford University Research University, has actually given us an equation to break down behavior. So behavior is motivation plus ability plus trigger. So I just want to call out ability there real quick. So obviously we all know that people have to have the ability to complete a task or to engage with your product. So it's more about perceived ability. What's the perception of actually, like, how easy is it to kind of get the job to be done, or how easy is it to earn that point or earn that badge, or, you know, level up. Even if it's impossible, it's about the perceived ability to actually complete it. And kind of when you think about gamification in this equation, you start to really open up your eyes to how it's everywhere in our lives. Like, you can kind of even take the thing about, you know, we stay in our jobs for two reasons. You know, it's whether we're getting paid or kind of career progression. And there are motivators. So that's kind of like almost like motivation in itself. So let's talk about the habit. So what a habit is. So again, Stanford University actually tells you what a habit is. So a habit is actually a behavior that is performed more than 18 times or 18 times. Now that number varies, and it can vary a little bit widely, to be honest. It can go up to about 100 times. And that depends on what the behavior is and the actual users. But essentially, like, when you look at that and you see, okay, a habit is a behavior performed 18 or more cycles, gamification actually pushes your users to perform a certain behavior repeatedly. You actually really can see the power of gamification. You can actually make your product a habit.
And is there a time frame on that 18? Like, are we talking, does it have to happen within a month or 12 years or?
So it depends on the cycle of the actual job to be done. So if it's a job that needs to be done hourly, then it's got to happen every hour. If it's something that's weekly, every week.
Right.
If it's something that, so
right.
it all depends. So it's really kind
The
of
outcome and the
not,
task
yeah.
matters. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, so again, just kind of really want to hammer home the point that, like, gamification can be this magical thing when it's done properly, when you're actually kind of got that desired outcome in mind, you're driving towards it, and you're actually going to develop a habit around it. So let's get into the actual kind of BMAT of things. So identifying what motivates your users. So there's 6 ways there's 6 human motivators, and any kind of motivator falls into these 6 buckets, and they're seeking pleasure and avoiding pain, seeking hope and avoiding fear, seeking social acceptance while avoiding social rejection. Already by looking at them, you can actually kind of put them into 2 columns, one being the white hat motivator, the second being the black hat motivator. A really cool example that I wanted to share, because it's kind of really easy concept to get your head around, is the Apple Watch and how it actually uses white hat motivation and black hat motivation to deliver the same outcome. So we can see on the left, it says, check your rings. Viz, your exercise ring is usually further along by now. Get in a brisk walk to help close your ring. So that's kind of using that avoiding pain motivator, right? They want Viz to know that he's usually way further along and he's actually risking not closing his move ring for the day. And so his activity sheet is going to have that kind of like fail on it, that he didn't move the ring for today. So he wants to avoid that pain. On the right-hand side, we've got Malcolm, and it says, Malcolm, you're so close to closing your move ring, a brisk 2-minute walk should do it. And that's kind of that seeking pleasure, kind of reminding him that it's only going to take 2 minutes and he can kind of get that pleasure of closing that ring. He's almost there. So that's a really cool example of showing you like white hat motivator and black hat motivator.
It's interesting to me, like the, what you're talking about here is, like, how does it relate to jobs to be done is probably my question, or an outcome, you know, that the user trying to, because these are emotions that we're talking about. It's almost, yeah.
Yeah, so it's kind of, I guess you're got to think of it as another layer on top of the job to be done. So what could motivate you to get that job done? So if we look at this example that I've used here, the job to be done is a brisk walk. So that's what the job to be done in both instances, but we're just talking about how do we actually use pleasure to get that brisk walk done, or pain to get that brisk walk done. It's a good discussion. I think even if people want to throw in the chat a product they use habitually, and maybe we can discuss where the motivator falls and how it actually kind of drives that job to be done.
And what's really interesting is, like, even you can see with the walking example, with the watch, like, there's two sides to it. One is depending on the user's emotion, the same outcome can be, you can drive them towards the same outcome by playing on different emotions that might vary for the same person at different times. Like maybe sometimes for Malcolm, he wants positive motivation. Other times negative, like avoid pain motivation is going to work.
Correct.
And because you can see that applying even in B2B space, right?
Yep, 100%. 100%. It's not only kind of relevant to the B2C place, the B2B space as well. You know, you've got to understand that people have workflows and they're interacting with your product during that workflow. So it's about understanding where in that workflow are they actually kind of touching your product and getting out of your product and coming back to it as well. Another thing I want to kind of call out as well, again, just kind of digging into my bag of experience there, is motivator is a different thing to notification. People sometimes misconstrue the two. So a good example I usually give is, you know, it's the end of the day, you sit down on the couch, you're watching TV with the wife and kids, or the husband and kids, or whatever it is, or, you know, the furry baby. It's been a great day at work, but you're over it, your phone starts ringing. And you look at who's calling, but then you don't actually answer the phone because you just can't be bothered. So the trigger's there, the notification is there, your phone's ringing in your face, you know who it is, but you just don't have the motivation to answer it. So it's kind of like looking beneath just the notification, if that makes sense.
Maybe there needs to be an Apple Watch style. If you don't answer this call, your relationship with Shady will
we'll
move
sell
further away.
yeah, right. Then you can have you can show it with an infographic of my face moving further away from your face. So yeah, cool. I don't know if anyone kind of had anything they wanted to discuss in terms of products they use and the motivators behind them. If not, we'll just kind of move on to the next. So we'll talk about the ability. So again, I just want to highlight that we're specifically talking about the barriers to ability. So obviously, goes without saying that if no one's able to use your product, it's a useless product, but it's the perception of the ability or the perception of the task that you're trying to get people to actually complete. So their time, so does the user have enough time to complete that task? Money, and it's not just kind of how much money does it cost, it's also the value, or the perceived value. If they're putting in $2, are they getting $2 back as like an ROI? The physical effort, do they have to open 8 tabs and scroll through 7 different screens to get the job done? The brain cycles, do we actually understand it? Is it way too complicated? The social deviance, do we see others doing it? And a really good, again, a good call out from my experiences here, when dealing with kind of executive stakeholders, they kind of see this, and it comes back to them not understanding the definition of gamification properly. They kind of see this, okay, I'm investing X amount of dollars, or I'm giving a user a certain amount of points that's worth X amount of dollars. So I expect the user to give me back X, Y, Z immediately. So, you know, if I'm giving them $2, I want them to fill out a survey, you know, that has 100 questions because that's worth $5 to me. So again, it's up to us as product managers to, from the very beginning, make sure that the business understands the strategy here, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to influence user behavior. So the lifetime value of the customer is going to be a lot more, but there is that initial investment upfront, and not to expect it back right away.
And that's because you're trying to invest in habit changing, which is hard, right? It's
correct. It's something that's really hard to do, and it takes a lot of finesse, a lot of effort, and a lot of testing, but it's incredibly rewarding in terms of the ROI, not just monetarily, but I guess emotionally, knowing that your product's actually helping people and it becomes part of their life. It becomes a habit. They rely on it to get done whatever it is that you're helping them get done. So there is that part of it as well. And I guess going back to, oh, sorry, there was one more, non-routine. So have we done it before? Is it something that's completely new, or is it something that's foreign to the user, or is it a concept that they're familiar with? So that's something to kind of think about as well. And I just want to quickly go back to the phone example on ability. So, I mean, if we could use the same example, but this time the phone's ringing, and, you know, with Scott on the phone, and I really need to talk to Scott about this webinar that we're doing, but my hand's full of groceries and I'm trying to open the front door, then I don't actually have the ability to answer the phone. So the motivation's there, but the ability isn't. So it comes back to thinking of BMAT as a pie, right? And getting the slices of the pie right. So that just comes with a lot of kind of testing and really understanding and emphasizing with your users.
I think what I like about this way is it makes, rather than that general ability being such a general thing, we can look at all the different factors. Like you can look at, does someone, and you can even measure these. Like, I mean, maybe brain cycles is hard to measure, but you can get into, do they understand it? How well do they understand it? What
Yeah.
percentage of people in my segment, in my user segment, understand the concept I'm talking about? I think it's great. I like it because it lets you get deeper and specific rather than having this general conversation around, do we think our users know how to use it?
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. I think it goes into something that you were discussing with our team earlier today, Scott, about Toyota and the 5 whys. So it's not just, are they able to use it? Why are they able to use it? Do you know what I mean? Why did they have the time? Why did they have the money? Why did they have the physical effort? You can really kind of delve in there, and it helps you emphasize with your users again, which is going to make you a stronger product manager all around, because you kind of understand your users even more by just understanding this ability part of it. Cool. So let's talk about trigger. So before I kind of get into it, a lot of people just kind of, again, think that a trigger is just a notification. So I just want to really kind of spend some time on like letting people understand that it's not just a notification. It's not just the fact that the phone's ringing. There's a lot more. What time is the phone ringing? Who's calling? So, you know what I mean? Like, are we sending notifications to a phone? So I've had to kind of really drive home the point to a lot of people in the past that just sending a phone notification or a phone alert is not enough. That's not a big enough of a trigger. It doesn't mean anything unless it's sent at the right time and to the right person. Going back to when we were discussing the Apple product, Scott, different people have different motivators. So you've really got to understand them to get this right. And then, yeah, so just really go beyond the trigger medium. It's like get inside the mind of your users, understanding them holistically is really important. Kind of like what feeling leads to them using your product. So how do they feel before they use your product? What state of mind are they in when they decide to use your product? Again, B2B, a lot of people say, oh, that's not really relevant to B2B. Well, let's go back to the workflow. Where are they in their workflow when they have to use your product? You know, how much more work do they have to do before? How much more work do they have to do after? It's kind of really important to think about. How often does this mindset occur? So, I mean, if we look at the workflow, how often does this workflow occur? Is it daily? Is it weekly? How often do people kind of feel the way they feel right before they use your product? And that kind of is going to help you kind of increase that trigger. And there's really like a really good way of supercharging these triggers. And it's a really awesome way. It's almost kind of like magical, and it works really, really well. And I really can't wait to share it with you, Scott. Like, do you want to hear about it? You're on mute.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty exciting. Like, I really want to share this with you. And I'm
What
really
is it?
excited to share it. I'm about to tell you. Just give me 1 second. It's actually mystery. Mystery is a really big way of triggering things. Like, you know, you're really engaged, you're really perked up. You're like, what is he about to say? What's this guy on about? So mystery is a really good way of making that trigger and amplifying that trigger. And how do we build mystery? Well, let's go through it. Really easy. Through variability. So variability is a really powerful tool when it comes to kind of building mystery. So it's actually, you know what, I'm gonna show you a bunch of pictures first, and I want you to tell me what they all have in common, Scott. Before I even tell you what each picture represents, I want to see what your thoughts are on what they have in common.
Well, it's something silly because Homer's involved in it.
Yeah.
Then there's a father and a son and some food. I can't link the. I can't pull the link. And then there's an apple, a really shiny looking Apple logo.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
not sure. I'm curious
I'll
to.
tell you what. Yeah, I'll tell you what they all represent first. So the first one is sex. The second one is movies. The third one is junk food, and the fourth one is good products or great products. I know a lot of people don't think Apple make the best products. I'm an Apple fanboy, so to me that represents great products. So what they actually do is they all stimulate the exact same part of your brain. Do you know what part of the brain they stimulate, Scott?
The mystery center. I don't know. I'm gonna.
Yeah, so a lot of people will probably think the pleasure center, right? Because all those things are pleasurable, but it's not the pleasure center. It's actually what comes before the pleasure, and that's actually the pain for pleasure, or the desire, or the kind of not knowing, and that's where the mystery and variability comes into it. And it's a really powerful thing. It's actually why gambling is so addictive. So gamblers actually enjoy gambling even when they lose. And the reason why is because they don't know what the outcome is. They don't know, are they going to win? Are they going to lose? How much am I going to lose? How much am I going to win? Like that, all of that really pleasures that part of the brain. So there's been a couple of studies on this, and I kind of referred to a couple. So one of them was done on rats. So where they gave a rat a button to push, and when they pushed that button, it stimulated that part of their brain in variable ways. Or that rat could have had any food they wanted, or that rat could have even had, oh sorry, a lab mouse, not rat, could have had cocaine. And all it wanted to do was push that button constantly all day long. And then when they kind of took it out further and did the same thing with humans, where they just kind of put a button in front of a human, an electrode on their brain that stimulated that part, they actually had to physically remove some people because it was just so pleasurable. And again, it wasn't kind of triggering the pleasure part of the brain. It was triggering that desire for pleasure. So that feeling right before you get your junk food, when you're really craving that piece of chocolate.
What's the, the example you gave was like the unknown. The mouse didn't know,
Yep.
and that's what triggered it. It's like, I'm either going to get nothing, or I'm going to get lots, or I'm going to get a little bit.
Correct.
But, but for the junk food example, like, I know when I go to McDonald's or I eat chocolate, like, in fact, my favorite chocolate is the one that's I know the flavor of and I go to all the time.
Yeah.
So, curious about the link there. Is it just the desire factor, and what you're kind of relating is the desire for mystery, like the desire for that variability or the unknown is part of it? Or
Yeah. So when you know that you're going to get something and you're just craving it, I guess it comes down to, you don't really know, like, is that chocolate going to taste the way it tasted last time? Am I going to feel as awesome as I did last time? I can't wait to find out. And then just kind of the whole not knowing, are you going to get it as a way of really supercharging it. So
I can
if
definitely
that
relate
makes
to
sense.
that. Like, especially if you don't know if you're going to get it, it makes you want it more.
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
more.
Yeah,
I can even
exactly right.
there's a really dumb example with like some software that we use regularly in the business, and every now and then it like there's like a celebratory animation,
Yeah.
and it's such a minor animation that in the scheme of their product it's not that big, but for the whole team waits and wants to click buttons in this software just to see if they got a person shooting fireworks or something.
Yeah, 100%. I guess if anyone's interested in what that part of the brain's called, it's the nucleus accumbens. If anyone wants to do their own research on it, just kind of to put it out there. The other thing is it's kind of like variability works in different ways. So we'll go through an example of how Uber uses it later on. But like a really good example as well is LinkedIn and Instagram, right? You might go on your feed, and the first post, you're not a fan, but you keep scrolling. The second post, you might not be a fan either, but you keep scrolling. Oh, I found something I like, I'll keep scrolling. You kind of keep scrolling, and your time on the app is kind of increasing just because you don't know what the next post is.
Before you know it, you're like, how was I on Facebook or LinkedIn?
Yeah,
Way too
exactly
long.
right. Exactly right. So yeah, let's get into kind of like variable rewards. So let's talk about the type of variable reward. So there's the rewards of the tribe. So that come from other people. So social media obviously is a big one there. Rewards of the hunt. So our primal search for resources. Again, we were just literally discussing that LinkedIn example. That's a reward of the hunt, right? And it's a variable reward of the hunt because we're searching our feed to find something we like, and we don't know how much we're going to like it. And you just kind of, that anticipation keeps building and building. We've also got the reward of the self. So competence, control, or mastery. And that's one that people kind of really don't get right. And we'll go through some of the bad examples of people using badges that mean nothing. Like badges are supposed to really feed into this reward of the self, like competence, control, or mastery. It's supposed to be some shiny thing that I have to prove more to myself than anyone else that I've mastered or I've controlled something of this, or I'm in the top tier.
What's an example, like a good example of competence, control, or mastery reward? Maybe in a either consumer context or even a business product context.
There's a few kind of like really good ones. Let's go back to LinkedIn. LinkedIn's a good one. I don't know if you've seen the profile builder. And when you build your profile to a certain amount, it gives you like a star and says, congratulations, you're a star. That's a really good one. So you feel really good about yourself.
You feel like you've mastered LinkedIn.
Yeah,
profile.
yeah, even that.
Yeah,
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 you
yeah,
build
yeah,
yeah, you followed some instructions. Congratulations. But it works, right? You get happy, you feel good. I don't know if you've ever used Code Academy. So Code Academy is kind of like this place to go if you want to kind of self-teach or become like a self-taught coder or programmer. And they've got this bunch of career paths and stuff. And their badges are really meaningful because they're actually given to you at key parts of the of the journey. So like I did the data science one, and so
yeah.
like the first badge was you mastered SQL, and it's got like it's a little badge, and the next one is you've mastered basic Python, so it's a bigger badge. It's kind of it's I knew what they were doing. It's kind of fun. It's one of those things where I know a lot about gamification. I know what they're doing, but I still
It
get
still
suckered in.
worked on you. Yeah,
Yeah, of
yeah.
course. Yeah, you've got no control over it. It's crazy. It's crazy powerful. All the stuff that we're talking about here. So really, really important thing that I want to draw everyone's attention to, and it's the hook model. And this was developed by Neil Earl, who's like Silicon Valley legend for creating habit building products. He's also got a really good book called Hooked. I don't know if you've ever read it, or I really recommend it to anyone in the webinar at the moment. And this is his model. He's kind of broken down how to build those behaviors and that habit. So we've kind of gone through trigger, action being ability, variable reward. The only thing that we haven't really gone through is investment. And that's just, I'll quickly kind of go over that. And that's actually kind of like time spent building something that's your own. And the reason why that's so important, and the best way to describe it, is the IKEA effect. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the IKEA effect, Scott, but it's a cognitive bias in which consumers place disproportionately high value on products they partially created
Oh, yeah,
or
yeah.
they perceive themselves as. So like I've got a piece of IKEA furniture and I absolutely love it because I built it, right? And it's probably old now and probably needs to be thrown out, but I'll keep it a lot longer than any other piece of furniture in my house because I remember like, you know, how frustrating it was to put it together and read those crappy little instructions that they give you. So it comes down to like a sense of pride, and that's what that investment is. And it can be something really small, like creating a profile. That's
Well,
an investment.
it's amazing. You know, in I'm thinking business product context where you know that the feature of like add your logo or your company's logo is often something
Yes.
that like technically is one of the most straightforward features, but often companies are able to pull people into a premium tier purely over the add your logo factor.
Yeah, exactly right. It's crazy. It's crazy how much a little investment goes on. Yeah, human beings are funny things, right? So if we quickly look at this hook model, it starts with a trigger, got your action, variable reward, so that mystery, that investment, so it keeps us coming back, investing in our profile, and then it goes back again, right? We trigger it again, and we go through the loop again, and that's how we get people performing those behaviors 18 or more times, and eventually becoming a habit and
And
become
because
self-perpetuating.
on that one, the investment one, another good example is like that I've seen is letting you know, as a new user, I can go in and I can change the color a bit of whatever it is I'm
Yep.
using. You know, I can just change the color of the user interface. Or I remember signing up for one of those drop-in chatbots that you can drop into your website, and they let you
Yeah.
change the color of the box. That was it, really. The color of the box and the icon for the robot. And I was kind of like, this is a minor thing, but
Yeah.
it made me go, well, that's my robot that I've picked,
Correct.
and it's
Yeah. Yeah.
my
That's
color
your
that
robot.
I've
Yeah.
picked, and so I
Yeah.
like them all. But then on the flip side, I think the thing is you could do more customization, but when I was signing up, they didn't ask me at that time. They did really well. They asked me just enough, so I invested just enough,
Yep.
and it got me bought into the rest of the product. So later on, I did more customization to invest more in it. But had they asked me up front, I wouldn't have been ready to make that kind of investment. So there's
Yeah.
always balancing, right? And this is where I think the hook model is great. Is it shows that it's a cycle. It's not a one-off thing, and you've really got to balance your steps or your investments and your
Exactly.
rewards,
Exactly. Yeah.
and be building
You've
them.
got to always be optimizing. Like you've got to constantly be optimizing your model, your triggers, your investment, your variable reward. It needs to constantly be optimized. Otherwise it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Well, look, it works to an extent and then it kind of starts to drop off from there. But if you want to really build that habit, you've got to constantly be optimizing. Awesome. So let's get into measuring success. So how do I measure if my my gamification piece or my gamification strategy has been a success? Now, there's going to be a lot more ways of measuring them, but these are ones that I've come across, or I've noticed that people have overlooked or kind of don't think about at the time. So I'm really keen to kind of go through these ones. So success metrics should always be measured. Should always be measuring the desired outcome, not the mechanics of the gamification that's being implemented. So what I mean by that is, let's go back to the very beginning. At the very beginning, we had a desired outcome that we wanted to achieve. And so let's say our desired outcome was to make more money, right? Okay, how are we going to make more money? We want to uplift sales. How are we going to uplift sales? We're going to use this gamification method to uplift sales. So rather than focusing on the metrics on who's engaging with the gamification piece, who's earning badges, who's earning levels, who's doing all that kind of stuff, you want to focus on the uplift of sales. Sure, that stuff's important to make sure that people are being engaged, but you really want to focus on the uplift of sales, and it needs to be a long-term analytical piece, not a short-term. So a rule of thumb is always like 6 weeks after you implement gamification, you should start to see that uplift in the desired outcome that you're starting to look for. So you really need to kind of keep that in mind, that it's not a solution that happens overnight, and two, you're measuring the desired outcome more than anything else. That's the most important part of your strategy. So measuring the intended behavior uplift should be done over a minimum of 6 weeks, as I just said. So a lot of people think it's like something that's going to happen straight away, or they do a temporary thing. And I had this challenge with Woolworths where they wanted to kind of put some of these initiatives in for like 2 weeks and then stop and then put them in for another 2 weeks. And that's just the retail mindset, right? That's just like, there's sales and stuff like that, sales cycles. But it was really taking them on the journey to show them that, look, this is a long-term strategy and it's worth it at the end. Sure, you might give up a little bit initial investment, but that sales uplift over, after the 6 weeks and beyond that 6 weeks is going to be amazing. And that's exactly what happened in the end, but it's just kind of really important to call that out. Yeah, so it's an important one. So be ready for unexpected consequence. So make sure you're checking all of your trends.
One thing I was going to say, just on the measurement, does 6 weeks kind of change a bit based on the volume of users and usage? Like if you've got a huge volume, conceivably tested overnight, or is it more that like what you're trying to do is change behavior and that's how much time you need to see people changing behavior?
Yeah, look, it might be slightly less than 6 weeks, but I think 6 weeks is a really good number from my experience, having done this in the gaming industry, having done this like with endless loyalty programs. It takes about 6 weeks before you see a really good uplift. And there's some people who are, I guess, more easily influenced than others. So they might uplift a lot sooner than 6 weeks. But if you really want to kind of measure it out and measure success properly and kind of not have any bias towards the data or anything, I'd wait 6 weeks and then look at the trend over 6 weeks. That would be my recommendation. But yeah, look, you're right. It can happen a lot sooner. But I wouldn't call anything a success or a failure if it's a major gamification initiative until I've seen 6 weeks of data, is I guess the point I'm trying to make. So be ready for unexpected consequences. And this does happen. So you've got to really be checking all your trends. Sometimes the unexpected consequences are awesome. Sometimes they're not so awesome. So like, don't neglect the numbers, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Don't neglect the analytics. Don't just focus on the desired outcome and the gamification mechanic analytics. Look at the whole product from beginning to end, especially in the first 6 weeks, but even beyond that, just make sure you're looking at it as a whole, because there tends to be some unexpected consequences because humans are just kind of funny things and really unpredictable. So a lot can happen. So we talked about the immediate spike in engagement at the very beginning. Look, it's only useful if the desired outcome was to like push people to a new product or feature. So it does work, right? You can kind of, rather than focus on the strategy, just kind of implement one really cool gamification element to get that original spike in engagement. But you've got to be doing it for a purpose, and you've got to be doing it purposefully. So like if you're doing it, it's pushing people to a new feature, and you've kind of had enough customer interviews and you've done enough tests and you've done enough beta testing that you know that this feature is awesome and these people are going to love it. So you've got to really kind of be mindful of that. So it's all about what getting it wrong looks like. So two examples, or two kind of like examples that come to mind when we think of people who have gotten gamification wrong. And the first one might be a really kind of surprise to you that Google actually got something wrong and like spectacularly wrong, was Google News badges. So a while back, a couple of years ago, Google News decided that they're going to give everyone badges based on the types of stories that they're reading. And you can level up those badges, and those badges are going to appear on your profile, and you can share them on social media, and it's going to be awesome. Now, what they failed to do is kind of tell anyone what those badges actually meant. There's no value to those badges. Okay, cool. And the other thing is they failed to actually understand their core users. So let's think about, like, I'll ask you a question, Scott. Do you want people knowing about all the types of news stories you read every day?
Not particularly.
And how often you read them? Yeah,
I don't really have a reason, but it's just like, I mean, I'll share a story if I think someone, but I don't need someone to know that, like, I'm really good at reading basketball news.
Yeah, exactly right. Like if you saw, I was going to say, if you saw mine, it'd just be like 5 stars for basketball and then a couple of stars for like finance and stuff like that, and some crime stuff. And like it just kind of like, it's a weird thing, right? Where it's almost like, oh, okay, well, you know, it's almost like a false perception of who I am based on what I'm reading. And that's kind of like what they failed to do. And that's because they didn't really have a desired outcome. The badges didn't mean anything. They just said, let's put some badges in Google News. Okay, great. Let's go do it. So that was a spectacular fail, and they did pay the price, like getting mocked left, right, and center all over the internet. But you know, they learned from it and they removed the badges. They're not there anymore, so that's good. And the other example is Wapperman Steel. So massive steel conglomerate based in the Netherlands. They decided they wanted to gamify the working experience by having a leaderboard and actually pitting employees against each other, almost unintentionally, by showing kind of like efficiency, how much time they're spending on breaks, what's going wrong. And there's TVs all over the steel mill showing all this data. And it really created a hostile work environment because, again, they didn't really consider the user's mindset or the user's motivators. Like, is it a motivator for me to know that, you know, Scott takes a lot of breaks? So, you know what? Scott takes a lot of breaks. I'm going to take a lot of breaks too. Like, it's there for the world to see. Or, you know, Scott's not as efficient as me, or I'm not as efficient as Scott. So maybe Scott says, you know what, Shady's pretty inefficient. I'm going to, you know, put my tools down for a bit. So it really kind of didn't have the intended effect. The intended effect was to kind of lift the efficiency and the productivity, but it had the opposite effect. And like that's kind of, it's a really interesting one as to why, because you can kind of see what their thinking was at the time.
I was going to say, do you think, like, I don't, you know, we probably don't know if they applied some of the thinking you've been talking about, but
yeah,
do you feel like you could avoid all these issues using some of the Stanford model you've spoken about? Like, do you also have to put into practice to actually see how people's motivations are going to work?
Yeah, look, you definitely can avoid them using the model. Like, that model's kind of like going to be foolproof for avoiding the type of mistakes that they're making. But yeah, you're right. You're not going to know how effective something is until you try it. I guess the idea is, if you really kind of adhere to that framework or that thinking that we've been talking about, you're going to have something that works, but how effective is it going to work is the question. So I guess in these two examples, it was something that had the opposite of the intended effect, because they just kind of didn't understand the user triggers or the motivators or any of that. So yeah, so that's a good question. But yeah, follow that, it'll work, but you still have to optimize to get it to work better, I guess is the takeaway there. So what getting it right looks like. So here's a particular one I loved, the speed camera lottery. So Volkswagen over in, I believe it was Germany, they had an incentive or initiative where they set up speed cameras around the place, and they called it the speed camera lottery. So what would actually happen is, if you're speeding, you get a fine. But if you're not speeding and you're actually kind of following the speed limit, you actually win part of the fine that people are paying. So it was a really, really effective tool, because what they noticed is that on the roads that they put it on, it actually kind of reduced traffic speed by 30%. So like, it's one of those things of going back to understanding white hat and black hat motivators, right? We all know speed cameras are a black hat motivator because you get a fine if you speed. But it turns out if you actually reward people for doing the right speed limit, it's a lot more effective. It's 33% more effective.
This is a cool,
which is really interesting.
I didn't know that you shared it. It's cool.
Yeah, it is. It's a really cool example. I actually love it because I want to be rewarded for driving in the speed limit as well. It's something that resonates with me, and I think with all people.
And it's interesting, like, alternate perspective on the outcome. You can use the way the technique was used to get the outcome, which is to get people to slow down. It's a super interesting thing to think about. I'll let you keep going.
Yeah, exactly. They really thought about what motivates people, and they kind of use that to their advantage. I guess one that's not up there, but I want to mention because I kind of alluded to it earlier, is Uber. Uber uses gamification really effectively, and they do it on two sides, on the driver side and the customer side. So on the driver side, they use what's called a ludic loop. So what a ludic loop is, keeping someone in constant motion by showing them what's on the other side. So what they do is Uber actually displays the next job to the drivers before they've finished the first job. And it also displays like the potential income next to it and how far they are from getting, let's say it's $100. They're in a current job. It actually shows, hey, your next job's worth about $20. You're $80 away. Take that job, you earn $100. And that's a ludic loop of keeping their drivers going and motivated. The other one they use is variability, and that's on the customer side. And this is a really interesting one because it's one of those ones that you don't really realize until you kind of really look into it. So if I was to ask you how much does an Uber cost from here to wherever, you won't be able to tell me the exact price, even if you've taken that route before, because it varies every single time depending on the car, surge pricing, the time, etc. And that's actually done on purpose as well, because it's a really strong motivator. So what that does, if you've got an option between there's a taxi right there, or I'll just check my Uber app to see how much it's going to cost to get somewhere before I decide, you end up saying, I'm already in the Uber app. I've already put the destination.
I'd never even thought of that like as one of their, I'm being manipulated.
Yeah. And it's a really effective one. And the most effective ones are the ones that you don't think that you're being manipulated. But yeah, it's really effective. So I just really wanted to kind of mention that one as like an honorable mention. So some key questions to ask. So I wanted to give everyone not some takeaways, but some questions that they should be asking themselves or kind of like anyone else in the business when it comes to thinking about gamification. So what internal trigger my product or feature is addressing? So what trigger or motivator are they feeding? So they kind of go hand in hand there. What is the external trigger that gets the user to product/feature? So the first one is the motivator, and the second one's more about the trigger. So kind of timing stuff and understanding how to get people in the product at the right time, or inviting them into the product at the right time.
It's such an interesting question for so many products, because like I just see again and again like really good products sitting there not being used, and people knowing that they're there. Like if you talk to them in an organization, you interview users or customers, everyone knows they're there, but they're just like, oh yeah, I just never I was chatting to someone yesterday, like, oh yeah, no, I know that app would be really useful to help, but I just don't have the reason to open it.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all about thinking about that reason, right? Give people a reason to open it, and what is that reason? What will be that reason? And how can we like almost manipulate that reason? What is the simplest behavior in anticipation of a reward? So we're talking about, okay, we're going to trigger something. What's the simplest behavior to actually kind of feed that desire that we just triggered, right? So think of it as we're triggering them to kind of build anticipation of a desire. How do we feed that desire? And the reason why we do that is it keeps them coming back the next time the trigger comes. So whether it's kind of like you get a notification, you press the notification, you give them a little reward, and then they can get into the jobs to be done, or then they kind of taken on the journey. That's something to really think about. Again, there's no kind of hard and fast answer. It depends on the product, depends on the users, but something to think about. Again, is the reward chosen and is it fulfilling, yet leaves the user satisfied? So think of motivators. So just because something's fulfilling doesn't mean it's going to satisfy your users. So you've really got to understand your users' motivations. And what bit of work is done to increase the likelihood of returning? So that's what you were kind of talking about before, Scott. We're kind of getting people to do a little bit before kind of, so they have that slight investment in the product or in their profile. So that keeps them coming back the next time.
Where you
don't want to ask them if
you're kind of getting just enough out of them in order to
help
engage the next time. And like for them, they probably feel like, oh, this is a bit of a, why do I have to enter this maybe? But you getting that information lets you come back to them later and build investment.
Exactly. And it's a balancing act, right? You want to get just enough out of them, but you also want to give them just enough as well. So like it's a two-way street. Cool. So key takeaways. So these are the key takeaways that I hope that everyone will be able to take away from today's webinar. And they will be. So start with a desired outcome and identify what user behavior will deliver on said outcome. I can't stress this one enough. You know, desired outcomes. And it's not only for gamification, it's for kind of any initiative that you're taking as a product manager. Always start with a desired outcome. Being outcome driven is always 100% better than being output driven. And like, yeah, can't stress that enough. Ensure the business is fully aware of the gamification strategy and what the key metrics are and what they're expected to look like. So expectations, right? Really kind of give everyone the expectation up front when you're selling this into your business. Let them know that it's going to take 6 weeks before we get kind of some meaningful data. Sure, it's going to take less, but maybe keep that data to yourself and then like not share it with everyone else till you kind of hit that 6-week period and you can answer any questions that are going to come because you can actually see the trend. And kind of really explain to them that there might be an investment up front. You're not going to get all your money back straight away, but you know, over the next couple of months or the lifetime of the user, it's going to increase significantly. So just really having those conversations up front. This one I can't it makes me shake my head every time. Do not use off-the-shelf gamification products. I've heard executives say, why don't we just buy gamification and see if it works? It doesn't work. You can't just buy some off-the-shelf kind of badge creation and deployment product and expect it to work because it's not going to be in line with what your product is. And the other thing is you haven't thought of a strategy for the badges. You're just giving badges for the sake of giving badges and you fall into that Google News trap.
Just on this one, I think it's a good statement to make to avoid what you've spoken about, but it's like, it seems to me, if you've really thought about it and done all the other things and it turns out that there's a product that fits, that's cool. But it's a good, it's almost like your default starting point should be, no, we're not just going to go buy something off the shelf. Let's think about it properly first.
Correct.
And then if we come back, at least we've come back with the right frame and we know it's for the right reasons versus just, yeah, hey, there's a badge product, let's do gamification.
Yeah, exactly. Look, by all means, if you've thought about things like purposefully and really in depth and you've managed to find an off the shelf product that works, then fantastic. I mean, I'd love to hear about it because I haven't seen one yet, but it could definitely work. And this is really something important to kind of stress. Like you can't buy success by paying for engagement for gamification. So a lot of, again, comes back to kind of managing stakeholder expectations. Just because you give users dollars for an action, it's a surefire way to ensure that the action is performed once and then never again. And like that kind of like is a hard and fast rule. Think about coupons or anything that you've ever used. And then have you ever gone back to that same business or that same company after using that coupon?
Yeah, it's like the gamification technique you're using should work on its own without having to pay people to use it, and then
exactly
the money then becomes a rather than being the reason, it's just a leverage factor. Like if you know they're going to do it, if they're going to do it anyway, if you give them money, then maybe it's just reinforcing or fast tracking versus like what you've described. If they just did it for the money and actually care about that thing that you've.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Them the first time they're doing it is just because they get, you know, whatever dollars you're offering without kind of really getting into the product or really caring or having that hook. You haven't spoken to their motivation. You haven't spoken to their triggers. You've just said to them, you know, here's $5, sign up.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I think is it So
question time.
Look, thanks so much for that. That was I think you get the award for first mention of a part of the brain on the product.
Awesome.
Product development webinar.
Using gamification there, Scott. You giving me a badge? Giving me the brain badge?
Giving you, yeah, that's it. I wasn't even doing it explicitly, but hey, it's Q&A time. While folks are punching their questions in, I have 2 questions for you. The first one is, you know, you've spoken about a gamification strategy and everything. Like, do you go in and do you say, hey, you know, you've come into a product or you're building a new product. Do you come in and you say, hey, everyone, I think we should do gamification as a strategy. I'm going to sell you on the benefits of it. And now we do it in future. Like, is that kind of, do you think of it that way? Or is it more of a case of, you know, you just have in your mind that we want to try and do a bit more of that. And then when opportunities come up, you do it on a case-by-case basis. how do you think about like how do you pitch it? How do you go from, hey, we're building some product features to, well, we're actually we're following what you would think of as like we're using gamification across the product?
Yeah. So you kind of don't just go in thinking, okay, I'm going to find a way of doing gamification. You kind of let it come to you,
Yeah.
because it needs some supporting factors, right? You need to have a journey that is able to kind of be influenced by the kind of like the frameworks that we've been talking, or the science that we've been talking about. So you've really got to look at the product holistically and kind of identify, is there a behavior, or is there a loop of behaviors, or a set of behaviors that I could influence using gamification? Are these users going to actually accept this gamification piece that I'm working on? So there's really no hard and fast rule. It just comes down to kind of looking at things holistically, and then kind of deciding how much is my time investing in this gamification is going to be worth it. Am I going to get the ROI? Am I not? Look, 9 times out of 10, the answer is going to be yes, but only if you've done it properly. And it's a real long-term thing, right? You don't just rock up on your first day as a product manager and say, okay, I'm going to introduce gamification. What are the users' motivations? What are the users' triggers? You're probably going to have to be doing a bunch of experimentation for a long time before you work out exactly what the motivators are, exactly what the triggers are, exactly what the ability barriers are. And once you've got all of those, then you can think about implementing a gamification strategy.
And is there there's a good question from the chat of like, is there a good time or bad time in a product's life cycle to be thinking about it? You know, is it better if the product's in play? Should you be putting it in from the beginning?
Yeah, okay. So again, it doesn't really matter as long as the strategy is supporting where the product is in this life cycle, right? Are you in the acquisition stage of a product? So your strategy should be supporting acquisition. So gamification should be supporting acquiring new users. Are you in the retention stage? Well, then your gamification should be supporting retaining those users. So yeah, so to answer that question, it doesn't really matter where you are as long as your strategy goes hand in hand on your roadmap, or where you are on your roadmap, or your product roadmap.
Using it as a technique to benefit where you're focused in either your metrics or your roadmap, or
exactly right. It's not something that's going to kind of get you from A to B, but it's going to support you in getting from A to B and get you there quicker and more efficiently.
So it's interesting though. I just want to kind of challenge, have this discussion a bit, because it's I give a really good example in a product that I've been involved in, where we had to add some features around emoji selection, and convincing stakeholders to want to invest in that was hard. Like, it just wasn't something that featured as a major feature. It's kind of like, why are we talking about this feature, with the people that have got the budgets? But then if you talk to users, they're all in on it. They wanted this gamified, like they wanted to invest a bit. They wanted to select their emojis. They wanted to like interact with it. They wanted the reward of getting the emoji talk back to them. In this case, it was a chat application. So it's like, it seems to me there does need to be some buy-in, that we're going to put the extra effort in, because ultimately it comes down to like budget and effort, right? As in, if you've got a use case that's there, you're going to invest a bit more in things that can be felt of as a bit gamified or gamey, because some people I've noticed don't have the appetite for that. They're not interested in it. So I'm super curious, because I see some companies as well, like Monday.com, for instance. They're like, you can tell they're all in on, they're using like every technique in the book. And Uber, like every technique in the book. Monday.com, by the way, is kind of like a competitor to Jira. But they're using every technique in the book to make sure people can use that product well, and everything. So I'm just really curious about just your thoughts on that.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I guess if you're doing it properly, and the proper way that we were talking about, of kind of going through those steps and the BMAT equation, and having all that data set ready, really understanding the motivators, the triggers, the ability, understanding how this is going to work and how it's going to give them a return on investment in the end, it makes the conversation a lot easier, because data is hard to argue with, right?
Yeah.
It's not just a hunch. You can't just go in saying, I think gamification is going to work. It's really got to be like, this is how it's going to work. And yeah, you're right. Some stakeholders are a little bit kind of hesitant to really start gamifying things for whatever reason. So you can do it in lots of really tricky ways, kind of like how Uber does it. We were discussing it's a different price every time. And like, yeah, that keeps you in the app. Like, that's not a real kind of outlandish or explicit gamification technique, but they've kind of hidden it beneath the surface. So that's another good way of getting people or getting senior stakeholders to buy in, whether you tell them that's what you're doing or not. Depends on the stakeholder, and then coming back to them later and saying, hey, you know, that feature that we implemented that's going really well, there's actually an element of gamification there. It doesn't matter how small that element is, let's explore it.
So you're saying sneak it in, prove that it works.
Sometimes.
And
then sometimes you've got to take the back door, right?
And then be like, hey, everyone, it works. Look at the results. We should do more of it. No, I know he's cool.
Yeah, you know what I mean. Yeah, it's that's soft skills that we need to use.
Yeah. And so here we go. Here's another one. I've heard that when someone, good timing, by the way, Karen, I was just about to ask for any more questions. I've heard that when someone stops using gamification to change behavior, their behavior returns to previous patterns. What do researchers say? Yeah, it's a really, really good question.
That's a great question.
And I think, I mean, my take on that is like, you've put some of these techniques in, maybe the variable pricing technique, just for working through an example, and then you've removed it and people stop with that behavior. Yeah, what do researchers say on that? And I mean, what do you think on it?
That's a great question. I'm not too sure what researchers say. I haven't really delved into the research on that side of things too much. There's definitely something there, right? I mean, as human beings, we pick up and drop habits regularly. I think it's just it's a case of really kind of iterating all the time. And that's why I mentioned before, you've got to always be optimizing. So if you're constantly optimizing them, you're not going to get that drop off. But yeah, it's a really interesting one. I'd love to kind of come back to you, Karen. I don't know if we have Karen's email or anything. I'd love to kind of go back, have a think about it, look at some of the research, and then kind of share that.
Yeah, no worries. We can figure that out, I'm sure.
Yeah, that'll be awesome.
Any other questions? We've just hit 4. We'll wait a minute or two if there's one last question. Otherwise, we'll be saying goodbye and letting everyone get back to whatever they've got to do next. From me, a big thanks to everyone. Thank you for attending. Shady, thanks so much.
Thank you so much
for all that. I love the psychology in it all. It's amazing, and I think a good way of thinking that often gets missed. It comes up in consumer products a lot, but I don't think it's thought about enough in B2B products and how they work, because it's such a big
100%.
With the consumerization of the enterprise, to use a famous buzzword going around at the moment, but like you can't ignore the emotion that goes along with workflow and tasks and process. And gamification is an excellent way to think rationally about how to implement and deal with the emotion of product users. Yeah.
Agreed.
Look, thanks everyone. We're gonna sign off now. Thanks for your time, everyone. And then I would just say, well, if you've got any questions, send us an email. We love doing these.
Please do.
I love doing them because I get to chat to everyone about all different types of products. So make sure you got your email down to hear about any new interviews that we do, any content that we're doing around product. We love it. Love uncovering folks around Australia doing products. So, hey, see you all next time.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great one.